We have a really good show for you guys today. We have some updates as far as HBAR and exchanges. We have some information on decentralized physical infrastructure. We also have some new games that we want to highlight, as well as a karate combat event that's coming up just tonight. And that's just the beginning. We also have Shark Bites with Rob Allen, and we have some surprisingly really good insights from the founder of Grelf. Not surprising for those of us who know Jake, but it might surprise those that think of him just as the founder of Grelf. Welcome back. I'm Brandon, the HBAR Bull. Now, I do some contract work for the HBAR Foundation, but I don't do these weekly updates in any official capacity. I'm just coming to you personally to give you the latest in the Hedera ecosystem. But as always, none of this is financial advice. Use it for entertainment or educational purposes only. And I know some people have been wondering where Zep has been. He's on a flight today. We were planning on having him here, but he's going to have to join us next week. So getting into that exchange news that I wanted to talk about, Kraken, one of the largest exchanges here in the United States, has just announced that they're going to have perpetual swaps for HBAR. Now, something similar was announced for Coinbase just a few weeks ago. And to explain what perpetual futures are, they're also known as perpetual swaps or just perpetuals, and are a type of derivatives contract that allows traders to speculate on the future price of an asset without an expiration date. Unlike traditional futures contracts, which have a set expiration date, perpetual futures can be held indefinitely. Perpetual futures are an increasingly popular financial instrument, especially in the world of cryptocurrencies, where participants can speculate on cryptocurrencies like HBAR, Bitcoin, and Ethereum, but can also be applied to other assets. And they're popular because they allow a greater degree of leverage, and though this isn't the case for HBAR, it can be more liquid than the spot markets. So the benefits are, like I mentioned, they have no expiration date, so they can allow traders to maintain those positions indefinitely. They can have that greater liquidity, and leverage allows traders to control larger positions with less capital. But there are risks. Leverage can amplify losses as well as profits. Margin requirements and liquidation risks require careful risk management. And depending on market conditions, the funding rates can be pretty expensive. Now, it's great we're getting additional products like this for the HBAR market, but I am a little bit surprised, especially on the Kraken market. We don't have a spot market for HBAR yet, but we have these perpetual futures. So one of the guesses as to why that's taking place is they want to test the demand for HBAR with these perpetual futures before they move to a spot market. So if you are familiar with futures and you are willing to trade something like this, putting a little bit of demand on this could potentially allow us to get that spot market in the future. The other thing in the exchange front that we saw was Coinbase is now allowing New York customers to get access to the HBAR. So it's good that we could have that really large financial market get access to the HBAR here in the future. All right, we're going to shift gears here a little bit into decentralized physical infrastructure, and in particular Neuron. Actually, 4D Sky, which is Neuron's first customer, really highlighted the beta project for Neuron. And they were showing how the beta testers down in Florida are tracking tons of flights using the newly deployed sensors. Now, as mentioned in the past, Neuron is starting with drone and aircraft tracking, but these sensors could be used for all kinds of different deep-end projects and devices. So we expect this to expand into smart cities, into autonomous vehicles, and all kinds of other stuff. They could actually work really well with WiseSat and CLSQ, who are going to have that constellation of satellites up there that they're going to use for transactional Internet of Things. But the satellites can't do everything. So having land-based sensors is going to be really important as well. And we know that CLSQ is going to deploy some of those land-based sensors, but it seems like Neuron is getting the jump here, so they could have a really large array of land-based sensors as well, allowing them to work together in that transactional Internet of Things space. All right, so we are going to shift gears here once again. We're going to get into gaming. This one's particularly for the degens out there. It's called Trade Games, and of course it's built on Hedera, everything being tracked on HCS. And pretty much all it is you simulate the trading of assets. You're given a certain amount of simulated money at the beginning of the week, and you trade that asset back and forth, and whoever ends up with the most money at the end of the week wins the game. And the prizes are nothing to sneeze at. You can get 10,000 HBAR every week just for coming in that top spot. Now, the asset that they're trading for the tournament this week is HBAR, not surprisingly. And the one coming up next week is going to be for Bitcoin. So for you degens out there, you can give it a shot. There's no cost to enter, but you could potentially win that 10,000 HBAR. And sticking with consumer engagement and the fun stuff we have going on in the Hedera ecosystem, we have Karate Combat 47, which is going to be live tonight down there in Orlando, Florida, and they have a heck of a card lined up. So why don't we run through it? Starting out in the Pit Submission Series, we have Izak versus Roka, and though in the up-only gaming, Izak is the favorite, Roka is actually the favorite when it comes to the betting lines with a 62% win probability. Pretty much the betting lines are flipping the up-only gaming odds on their head. So I'm probably going to go with Roka on this one. For the other Pit Submission match, Phil Rowe is a heavy favorite as far as the betting line, and even more so when it comes to the up-only gaming. So I'll probably go with Phil on this one, but I'm not going to put too much on it. We only have one Influencers Fight Club fight tonight, with Ben the Bane Davis going up against Most Wanted. Here's another one where the betting odds are swapped with the up-only gaming odds, with Ben having a 65% win probability as far as the betting lines, but only 41% on up-only gaming. Now, since we can't have nearly as much information on these Influencer Fight Club fights, I generally avoid them, but there's nothing wrong with putting a little bit of karate on these to keep it interesting. Next up, we have Ortega versus McCullum at lightweight, and the up-only gaming odds are pretty much matching what we're seeing in the betting lines, with Ortega having a win probability of nearly 80%. Kat Nelson and Brittany Cloud are the only ladies that are fighting tonight, with Brittany being a slight favorite, but an underdog as far as up-only gaming, so I am probably going to go with Brittany on this one. We're seeing Gabriel Stankunas go up against Gustavo at bantamweight, where Stankunas is a decent favorite as far as the betting lines, but a slight underdog as far as our token holders, so I'm going to lean towards Stankunas on this one. Next up, we have Montalvan versus Rodriguez at bantamweight. The up-only gaming odds have tightened up a little bit, but not nearly as much as the betting lines, so this might be an opportunity to take the underdog depending on where those lines end up. Comparing the betting lines to the up-only gaming for Lorenzo and Jonathan Ortiz, we're leaning a little bit towards Lorenzo, who currently has a 79% win probability. Next up, we have Luis Melendez and Will Esparza at welterweight, with Melendez being a decent favorite on both up-only gaming and the betting lines. We have another welterweight bout between Brugal and Guiden, where the up-only gaming odds are pretty much matching what we're seeing coming out of Vegas. In the co-main event, Vergara is a heavy favorite, with 91% of token holders go in that direction, which even exceeds his win probability of 83%. And finally, in the main event, we have Rafael Alves versus James Vick. Even though Vick has some experience in the UFC, he's struggled a bit in Karate Combat, so I think that Alves being the favorite here is the right pick, and that's who I'm going to be going with. So there's a new feature that's been introduced for this Karate Combat event, and that's delegation. So if somebody doesn't necessarily want to go through the hassle of doing the research and digging into these fighters to make their own picks, they can designate it to up-only gamers who have had a lot of success in the past. Now, they do have to give up some of their winnings to do this, with 20% of the winnings going to whoever is making those picks. I think Karate Combat is doing all the right things and shaking things up on a regular basis to keep up-only gaming interesting. So like always, we got some great questions from the community for Shark Bites, and Rob did not disappoint as far as his responses, so let's check out Shark Bites this week. Rob, welcome back. How have your travels been?
Hey, Brandon. Yep, traveled light, ended up in Italy, and now enjoying La Dolce Vita.
Well, your digs look unbelievable.
Yeah, this is a collection of tribal weapons and masks that I've been collecting for years. So they finally got a home.
That's awesome. So just to kick this off, last week there was one little correction we wanted to make on the Hyundai news and give some props to a team member within the Hedera ecosystem that has done a fantastic job up to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't realize that I had not name-checked Alice Kim when I mentioned Hyundai. Those of you who've kind of watched Shark Bites for some time probably know that Alice is the foundation member that I give the most name checks to. And there's a reason for that, because I honestly think she's one of the hardest working members of the HBAR Foundation. In fact, I worked with her quite closely on the stablecoin pilot with Shinhan Bank and all the others. She's an awesome person. She has actually, I would say that she's probably the hardest working, most trustworthy, most loyal member of the HBAR Foundation. And if she's ever looking for a job, I'll be the first at the front of the queue to offer her something, I think. So anyway, thanks, Alice, and apologies for not giving you another name check last week.
She's been integral to the Hyundai use case, Nada Slime World. Of course, we just covered that recently. The Shinhan stuff that you
LG,
mentioned, and of course LG as well.
in fact, the whole of the Korean ecosystem is largely based on her efforts. So give her a promotion. Why don't you, Shane?
Yeah, no, she certainly deserves it. All right, we're going to jump into these questions. I know you don't have too much time. The first one comes from Pearson Art, who says, for Rob next week, Hedera has been close to the Fed in a number of ways, trusted advisory, etc. When does utility break away from the meme-obsessed crypto narrative? How can the governing council leverage their networking connections to get that message to leaders?
I mean, it's a very, very deep question that I'm not going to spend a great deal of time answering. We have Nilmini in the Hedera team, the LLC team, who's doing an amazing job. You know, sort of always out there, always preaching the message, getting the great value of the governance model that Hedera has implemented across to the leaders. I mean, we're in a very strange time now, aren't we, with the political cycle, especially in the US, now using crypto almost as a kind of key point of differentiation. So between the regulatory advances that we've seen in the last year or so, and Hedera's specific and fairly unique position in terms of its regulatory friendliness, I think the utility plus the regulatory posture are both kind of key selling points for Hedera, and it just makes Nilmini, who's another very hardworking member of the ecosystem, makes her job reasonably straightforward, if not easy, to take to those who will listen across policy groups, across governments. Hedera and Nilmini has just signed off on the joining of Blockchain Australia, which is now the Digital Economy Council of Australia. And we've got a very strong policy set of objectives. The trailblazing that Hedera have been doing in Europe and the UK and the US is a playbook that helps us as well. So yeah, I mean, utility is everything really. But the fact that we have a layer one network with a cryptocurrency that has true utility definitely helps that regulatory and policy discussions that are ongoing.
Nilmini has been a great representative all the way up to Capitol Hill, so we certainly appreciate her efforts. The next one we have is from Aaron B. 5380, who asks, what do you expect to be the next enterprise-grade use case that will go live on mainnet? Do you expect that to happen this year? I'm guessing he's thinking of a high-volume use case, because we do have enterprise-grade use cases hitting the network on a fairly regular basis.
Well, I mean, and I do say this a lot, all use cases on Hedera are enterprise grade because we have an enterprise grade network. I suspect he means an enterprise use case. It's difficult to say, right? We're 6 months into the year. We've got another 6 months to go. We do get surprised from time to time, but we also, have a set of signals that we can see coming down the track. I certainly see quite a few coming through CorpCom and the other governing council members. We have our own projects as well, of course. In terms of high throughput use cases, I don't know for sure. There are a number that I would like to think would start ramping up. We have both been holding out for the micropayments use cases for some time, and I think we're probably quite close to being able to achieve that. It doesn't class as enterprise in many categories, but the Zeni use cases for me are almost enterprise in waiting. Their enterprise scale, the potential for that business addressing the challenges of the travel industry is an amazing, wonderful use case. So, I'd love to see that. Hyundai, we talked about earlier. I think Alice will continue to work very hard with the Hyundai team in order to start scaling that up. I think we've got some big refi use cases coming along. So the regenerative finance with some big partners, which could really move the needle, and all of the rest, right? Because we're at that stage, I think, in the cycle where the floodgates will open. And I know that at the very extreme end of optimistic sometimes, and I'm called out for such, but that's okay, right? You know, we've got a lot of pessimists in the ecosystem right now, so I have no problem with being one of the opposing camp in terms of optimism. But there will be increasing number of big use cases over the coming months and year and beyond. So other than that, as soon as we know about them, we'll be talking about them. Of course, we've got all the CLSQ. I mean, that's likely to start moving the needle later in the year. Neuron, similar deep in use cases like that. I mean, there are too many to list, right? And we forget, you know, we get very kind of caught up. Recently, the community's been very caught up in very specific things, but take a step back, take a breath, and look at all these amazing use cases that are coming along. And, you know, they will start ramping up the TPS and the revenue for the network and everything else. It's just one has to be patient, unfortunately.
Well, there is a little bit of an asymmetric information distribution between the pessimists and the optimists, or you in particular, because you do have a fair amount of information on what's going on within the Hedera network.
Yeah,
so I'm going to lean toward your optimism.
I wear a smile for a reason, right? But there is, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about in the public domain. I mean, not even, you know, those things that are happening that are yet to be made public. I mean, in the public domain, you know, just join the dots, look at what's going on, and be patient. Yeah.
We'll get Danny Eid on it for sure. So the next one comes from DMNMNN, who said, Shane said the HBAR Foundation wants to fund a community DAO. Is there a chance that this DAO could get a seat at the governing council? The community doesn't feel heard, and there is a disconnection between Hedera and the community. I think a lot of community members feel the same right now. This could be an opportunity to close the gap between Hedera and the community. If you want to become the trust layer of the internet, you need to embrace institutional as well as retail interests.
Yep. Very loaded question. I think we have dealt with community on the governing council before. I mean, there are two aspects of that question, of course. There's the community deserves a seat on the governing council, and there is the community feels like it's not being listened to or heard. I don't think those two things are the same. Well, certainly not a seat on the governing council will do the other thing, because it comes with and there's been some debate in Telegram and on Twitter about whether that would be a good thing or not. As it currently stands, you know, the governing council membership comes with responsibilities. It comes with obligations that could not be met by a representative of a community, let's say. Much as I personally would like to think that in the future we might be able to create structures that are representative and could host a node and sign transactions and have the backing of a kind of corporate grade risk and financial and fiduciary obligations, all of those things are necessary for the governing council membership. And of course, there's a lot of commercial and NDA-based sensitivity, which means that representative couldn't flow all that information back into the community, which is largely what they I think are seeking to do with these questions. That said, I think there are ways that we can address the being heard aspect. I hear that is the case, and I as a community member, first and foremost, I agree. I think we are making steps towards that now. On my own committee, CorpCom, so that Cy Rout and I co-chair, we had Tudor Holesko from the DeFi Alliance along to brief the governing council members just a few weeks ago. And that went down incredibly well. The governing council members of the committee, the Hedera staff members who were there, the Swirls Labs members who were invited to join, were universally praising of what Tudor was able to kind of tell them about the DeFi Alliance and DeFi in general, and the needs of the community at that end of the scale. And I think it was a bit of an eye opener to many of the governing council members who are there. So that's just an example. I think there's a way that we can more closely engage the governing council, either individually or through some kind of invited expertise like Tudor brought into the committees. That doesn't necessitate a seat on the board, of course, but we have the ability within the committees, and the co-chairs can largely call forward any invited experts should there be a need. So I think that's probably a good way to start. And then the other aspect, of course, is how do we engage? How do we communicate together? How do we listen? How do we market? And we have to find a better way over time. I know Charles has plenty of good ideas on this as well. So I'm hoping that fairly soon he'll be able to implement some of those new plans.
Good to hear. Good to hear. So the next one comes from Boyard Engels, who asks, how come transactions come to a complete halt from time to time? Is that required for each new use case that gets added to mainnet?
No, it isn't. Of course not. I mean, mainnet should just run and people just build on top. We're at that stage now, and I'm not sure whether the question actually means the complete halt in terms of mainnet upgrades, which still happens. It will, I understand, over time now with the modularization update, there'll be less need to do a full mainnet stop and restart. But it's the other aspect, of course, is when Atma turns off, and it looks like it's stopped because of the massive difference between TPS when Atma's turned on and the background transactions when it isn't on.
It is interesting that the background transactions, we're still processing as many as Ethereum is processing, even when Atma is turned off. It's just because there's such a stark difference between when we have that premier use case running and when we're normally running that people feel like it's getting turned off.
Yeah, and when it comes back, it always comes, or usually comes back, a little bit higher. So I don't know what they do in those periods of having switched that off, but they have a backlog to process when they switch back on again, and then there seems to be a little bit more. Maybe I should go and ask Max Winograd at Atma what's going on there. But yeah. There are a number of reasons why that's the case, but it's certainly not the case that we need to restart the machine every time a new use case goes live.
Good point. Good point. All right. So the next one comes from Ilio, who says, we have the best use cases, the best adoption, and the best real world utility. What's the point of these use cases when they haven't bought a single HBAR to run operations? For example, Atma.io, the biggest one, has been running for almost a year on free HBAR.
Yeah, this question comes up a lot again, doesn't it? So, and my response is always, well, how do you know? How do you know that the enterprise use cases aren't buying their own HBAR? We only know that Atma.io is granted for a short period of time in production to fund that growth curve that we see and celebrate. What about all the other ones? I'm not aware that they have grants. It is true that in some cases there are grants to grantees that are rewarded with their own growth, right? So, in production, you hit a certain threshold, a certain KPI per the agreement, and more HBAR is released. That's an approach that the foundation uses that I think is a good one, right? It's a win-win. So you're kind of granted to grow your business and to the point at which you get that proper adoption by your nascent customer base. So I think that's valid as well, and it won't be forever, right? So there is a finite time that some of these production granted HBAR solutions and projects receive their HBAR. It won't be forever. It will just be while they get this traction, this adoption. And then remember, all network revenue, it may be granted, but it comes back into the treasury. So it comes back into account 800 and into the treasury and pays hosting fees as well, by design. So it's not like 100% leakage. It's actually funding the machine, funding the flywheel, and it comes back into treasury so it can be granted to other grantees to develop the ecosystem. So, I don't see it as necessarily a problem. But the direct answer to the question is no one really knows whether there's more than one or all of them are being grant funded at the moment. And I suspect, actually, I do know that there are enterprise projects that buy their own HBAR and fund their own usage. But because they're not high TPS ones, then, you know, 1/100th of a cent or 1/10th of a cent for interactions kind of really does fly below the radar.
Point taken, point taken. So the last one comes from YUser5821, who asks, question for Shark Bites, who's the foundation accountable to? And are there any target KPIs for them to meet? Thank you to you and Rob for your valuable contributions to the community.
The foundation is accountable to the foundation's board. When Hedera decided to decentralize, whenever it was, 2.5 years ago, as that first stage of decentralization, and we spun out the business development team and the foundation was created, what happened was a group of people came to Hedera and made a pitch, made a proposal for to create a foundation. They were invited actually to pitch. And those people formed the initial board, who then appointed a CEO in Shane Higdon. And there was a negotiation between Hedera and Foundation. This was necessary. It was deemed at the time to create a non-control, you know, a lack or an absence of accountability to Hedera. So the second organization was set up to do that. And so that group of people then spun out and, you know, offered roles to the business development team, some of whom were already in Hedera, and some were hired, you know, to bolster that team, and the two separated, right? So and at certain times, the foundation comes back to the governing council and says, you know, for these purposes, we need additional HBAR. The governing council debate, sometimes hotly, about, you know, the amount that should be granted to, you know, all of the ecosystem partners, not just the foundation, but HashGraph Association, DLT Science Foundation, and Swells Labs as well, actually, for, you know, engineering services to the network. But they're all done as counterparties rather than any true accountability, and they all have their own board, so they operate in a way which, you know, the governing council and Hedera itself, you know, cannot control. So they become, you know, accountable to themselves and masters of their own destiny, but they still have to deliver, you know, to KPIs that have been set, just not controlled. There's an agreement, a contractual agreement between Hedera to these third parties in order to deliver a service, and there is an expectation that that service is delivered for the, you know, significant sums of money that are handed to them to do that. And Charles Adkins, as president, has the role to ensure that those agreements are adhered to.
All right. Thank you, Rob. We appreciate you taking the time from your break to come on here and answer the community questions. We appreciate everybody for dropping your questions down below. So continue to do that and enjoy the rest of your time off.
Thanks, Brendan. And hope to see you next week. Cheers.
So Rob is getting a little bit of a break out there in Italy, but he's still working hard from everything he's told me. Continue to get those questions in and we'll get your questions answered. One of the things that we do want to highlight is SaucerSwap is now supporting Wallet Connect, which is allowing additional wallet providers that support Wallet Connect to connect to SaucerSwap and allow those users to trade. So the next team that is adding features and bringing things to market is VR Jam. I know there was some controversy around them, but they're clearly trying to bring new products to market. And what they're bringing right now is a metaverse space called the Hedera or the HBAR House. And there's actually going to be an HBAR that you can interact with in the house and ask questions. It gives you those answers from AI. So it's going to be really interesting to see how all that turns out. So another guy who's been talking to us a fair amount is Grelf. And I caught up with the founder of Grelf, Jake, and he had some really insightful things. You might think of him just as the founder of Grelf, but he really does understand, you know, community and the Web3 space in general. So let's listen to what he had to say. Jake, thanks for stopping by.
Of course. Anytime.
So a lot of people might just think of you as the Grelf creator, but you really do understand crypto, Web3, and community in general. Now, there's been issues under the surface in the Hedera ecosystem for a while. I think they're fairly easy to identify. They might be a little bit more difficult to find the will to correct some of these things. And these things have bubbled to the surface over the past few weeks. And we're getting opinions from everybody. And we need to pay attention to all those opinions. But you really had some great insights on how to correct some of these issues in the Hedera ecosystem on Brandon D's show just last week. And I was hoping that we could consolidate some of those ideas a bit for my audience and give the bullet points on what you would do to course correct at this point.
Sure. You're not wrong. It is simple. It's simple. And my main things, I think I can condense them down to two issues. And those issues are one, communication, and two, direction. Now, communication is something that inside and outside of business, people have problems with. The biggest problem for couples, for instance, is communication. Now, you can kind of break this down into three important factors for good communication. That is clarity, transparency, and frequency, right? Frequency being a lot more important than some people might understand. And this is both inside and outside of an organization I'm talking about. I'm not just talking about the community. I'm talking about the organization, the company, the business, because they need to know what's going on too, right? So clarity, transparency, frequency, that's what you're doing, how you're doing it, and when, right? The time scale is important. Now, when you're talking to anyone, be it your personal friends, a sports team, a massive Web3 business, you're going to want to know what's going on, what is kind of the direction, and when are these pieces happening, right? When are the big events happening? Now, tying into direction, because these two things are very, very, very much connected. Direction's where you're going. Communication's where you are now. Rob Allen said something that's stuck in my mind with regards to direction, that Hedera, and I'm not talking about, this whole thing is not targeted at anybody specifically. This is targeted at the organization. And even, the community, there's things that we can improve on. But Rob Allen said Hedera should be fit for purpose. And immediately what I think about, when people say stuff like that is, okay, what is the purpose? Do we know? And I don't think we do. I think that direction-wise, there has been a big oversight in communicating to people inside and outside the organization. What is our purpose? Something I talk about a lot is we can't feel you. We don't know where you are, and we don't know where we're going because we don't, right? There was a big focus on presenting, hiring people based on this vision, that the vision was enterprise. And I think going forward, part of the vision should definitely be enterprise. We should focus on our strength, right? But we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And we know we have to pivot to retail. We have to pivot to retail. Everybody at this point knows we have to pivot to retail. That's nothing new. How do we get there is kind of the big question. And it ties back to communication. If we are going to make this big change in direction, right? This big change in vision, which is a big thing, people need to know what we're doing, how we're going to do it, and when, right? I think these conversations are happening behind the scenes, but we don't get there. We can fix some of the basic issues easily. I think communication can fix much of the basic issues easily, but it's about where we're going. It's about that future unifying vision. And I do think people were hired, brought into this organization, paid under a specific vision. And I think that vision was not fit for purpose. I think that vision was not fit for where we want to be. We don't want to be Google. We don't want to be a Fortune 500 tech company. We want to be the best example of what a Web3 company, startup, can do. And I think personnel changes is something that's going to help, because you need to bring in people who are already experienced with the new vision. This is going to be difficult, that that you're creating, and you will have to create a new vision. We need to know where we're going, and you need a strong leader. We have Charles, which is good. But there's going to have to be a lot of people inside the organization that either catch up to this really quickly, or some new blood is brought in that understands on a basic level. Companies need to make money. They need to reward their investors. That's very basic tenets of business. And what's different about Web3 compared to traditional business is there's an opportunity to break down walls between your investor and your company, to decentralize to the people that are supporting your network. And I think that has not been as big of a part of Hedera's vision as it should have been. The network works great, the tech's great, but we need to see how that tech can benefit the people who are engaging with it.
Well, Jake, let's break down a little bit why it's important to focus on retail. Now, of course, we have this huge enterprise focus that comes from the governing council, that comes from Swirlds Labs. They focus an awful lot on, everything that enterprises need. We have the Hashgraph Association that does the same. They have the enterprise program themselves, and then the HBAR Foundation, a big part of why it was created was to focus on retail. And they have had a fair amount of retail focus, but they've also, just like all the other entities, focused an awful lot on enterprise as well. I mean, one of their largest grantees as far as usage is Atmio, and that is a pure enterprise play. And, I look at why retail should be a big focus, and there's a couple reasons. Number one, they're higher value users. And when I say that, I mean, if you're looking at something like Atmio, you're doing a lot of HCS transactions, right? 1/100th of a penny. Even if we're doing things like stable coins, we're talking about 1/10th of a penny. But once we get into retail, we're using smart contracts a lot more for things like DeFi. We're talking about 5 cents for every single one of those smart contract calls. Every time you create a new account for something like Karate Combat, that's 5 cents. So the engagement that you get out of these retail users from a revenue perspective is really important. But then even if you don't have the revenue yet, we can certainly get plenty of revenue from enterprise as well. But that has been a lot slower coming, and especially unsubsidized revenue. But up until that point, the ability to pay for everything that's happening in the Hedera ecosystem is really people that are speculating on the HBAR, on the utility that the HBAR is going to bring. So we lean completely on retail when it comes to our backup plan. Until we get to having full revenue to be able to make this a sustainable project, we have to lean on the HBAR holders. And that goes to your point that we have to treat them fairly as well.
Right. Longevity is something that has been talked about since the beginning, right? 100-year company. And, I've said this, I think that was a big misstep as far as communicating vision, because if you're setting up to have a 100-year company, you only have to worry about making profit after 99 years. So we need to make sure that we can have a vision for longevity, right? We do want to be a 100-year company, but to get there, there's things that we need to balance regarding our books now. And I know this is true, that there is a disconnect between people who work at Hedera in how they understand where the money's coming from. It's not coming from enterprise. I'm sorry. That is a future plan, right? That's a future idea for direction. But unfortunately, we're not at that point. We're at a point where we need to invest in what people are doing on cryptocurrency networks now, on today. That's how you have a business. You have to focus on where the action is, where the market is, where the money is. And the money is not currently in enterprise. That's a smart play. It's a smart future play, but that's a future investment. And we need to start making returns today with the environment we have today.
And what are some of your suggestions on how we can do that? How we would shift focus a little bit to gain some of that retail traction?
The biggest easy improvement is marketing. Now, previously, this has not been clearly clarified, which is unfortunate, but I know based on some reactions that there is a legal concern with marketing in general. I don't think it's as big as some people may imagine, but there are ways to set up specific marketing organizations that are funded and set up outside of certain jurisdictions so that you can effectively market and connect with retail. Other cryptocurrencies set up foundations for this specific purpose. On a basic level, there's just some very basic marketing stuff we need to start doing when we are putting ourselves out there, when we are putting our people out there at big events. Karate Combat's been a great success. We need to make sure that the Hedera name is visible. That's a big thing, because if we just see that logo, if we just see that H, apparently we also share that logo with someone else. So there's confusion. Right? It's not easy to search H with a line in it and find Hedera. That's a very simple thing we should leverage, but it's marketing. It's supporting the people who are here. The biggest asset we have, and we have an extremely talented community. I have been to other communities. I'm not just a Grelf guy. I do work in Web3 marketing on the Flare network. I've been to other communities, and the amount of talent that we have with the honestly lack of investment in our community that I've seen is astounding. I mean, we have a fantastic, professional, extremely talented community that I think we should invest in more. This doesn't just mean throwing free money around. This just means, lifting people up, talking to people, getting them in the room. We have experts here, and we are a resource that should be used.
One of the things that I've noticed is they have this intrinsic drive, and not even from what they are gaining, from a financial perspective now, but just what is possible in the future. That's what drives them, what they could potentially build that could drive them in the future. And one of the things that I think we could do to foster that a bit is actually the staking rewards, because in a lot of cases, their revenue is in HBAR. So, marketplaces, wallets, and so on, their revenue is an HBAR. And then if you can, the ones that are being successful that have more revenue, you could incentivize them more by putting those staking rewards up a bit. And then they could hold on to maybe some of what they've earned and live off the interest in some cases. And it also drives them to get even more revenue, and it drives success and so forth. So I think that's another thing that we could go, or another direction that we could go. But I think we should look at some of these other networks that are having a lot of success. And Solana is a great example of that. And one of the biggest things for Solana has been meme coins in recent weeks. Now, you have a meme coin in Grelf that is, I think, it's really hitting on something. How interactive he is absolutely amazing. I think the way you use him out there in the social media world has been fantastic. Can you give us any updates on Grelf and what he's doing?
Sure. So Grelf is going to be the first meme coin to make it to a centralized exchange. It's going to be on CoinStore. We're targeting July. I don't have a specific date because it's actually the first HTS that they're integrating. So once he's out there, it's going to be a lot easier for other HTS to just plug in and get listed on centralized exchange. A little lower barrier to entry than some of the bigger ones, Gate.io. So it's a little more affordable. I said previously that I wanted to, before we got on a bigger exchange, wanted to be at 10 million market cap consistently. I still feel that way, but this was an opportunity to, low barrier of cost entry, get in there. Relative low barrier of cost entry, get in there, try it out, learn some things, and then set us up for a bigger exchange. With Grelf, he's always been an extension of my creative expression. And, I love Hedera. I love the Hedera community. So being able to, combine a creative love with, this love I have for Hedera has been extremely validating. I love interacting with people. I love the narrative of so many people just having so much instant repulsion for him, and now are starting to understand and love him, and not judge that book by its cover. But yeah, the goal with Grelf is to continue that engagement, continue that interactivity, make him better, make him easier to talk to, because as we mentioned, communication is very, very important.
No question about that. So one more question. What exactly is going to satisfy Grelf when it comes to the giraffe situation?
Okay, well, here's the thing. A lot of people are like, oh, well, you can donate to a foundation. We can digitally adopt a giraffe, which I would encourage. We had World Giraffe Day a few days ago. I would encourage people to go to the Giraffe Conservation Foundation and adopt a giraffe. But he wants a real one. Unfortunately, he wants a physical giraffe. He wants to be able to pet it. He wants to be able to see the spots. Look into those giant bulbous eyes and get some butterfly kisses from those extremely long eyelashes. We need to see that prehensile tongue, that blue prehensile tongue, like eat a graham cracker or something. So, Hedera, it started out with the HBAR Foundation. I'm expanding it to, now all of Hedera is going to have to fill this concern, and we're going to need that giraffe. We're going to need it pretty quick.
All right. So one more thing when it comes to the giraffe. If you could adopt a giraffe and it was at a zoo and he could go and actually visit it, would that be, someplace in the middle, meeting in the middle that he would accept?
I think that you could set that up, and you could tell him that he owned it, and he wouldn't know the difference. So that's a loophole there. If you have him able to visit the giraffe and just say, oh, well, it just lives at the zoo. It just lives at the zoo. It is yours. I think he'd buy that.
There you go. All right, Jake. Before we let you go, is there anything else you'd like to pass on?
The only thing is, and it's something that you touched on, people in the community are hungry. They're hungry. They're passionate. We need to see some of that hunger for change, that hunger for a new direction, and that hunger for progress from Hedera.
Good stuff. Perfect note to leave on. Jake, thank you so much for stopping by. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you. Always.
And the final thing before we get into network analysis that I want to cover is modularization. We've been talking about that the past couple weeks. There was an upgrade to the Hedera network that's allowed this modularization, and we caught up with Richard and Ed from Swirlds Labs to give us the inside track. Richard, Ed, welcome.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Brendan. Happy to be here.
All right. So, guys, we're going to jump right into this. Ed, I'm going to start with you. Can you explain the upgrades we've seen, particularly around modularization with version 0.49?
Sure. In release 0.49, we introduced a major update to the Hedera services software by modularizing that code base. And so what that means is we've broken down that services layer of code into smaller independent modules. And just to give some context, we have the consensus algorithm, which is the platform where everything is built. And then on top of that platform, we have the services code base, we have SDKs, and then on top of that, we have tools and accelerators and much more. And so by restructuring that services code base, we're making that code base easier to understand, easier to manage, easier to collaborate on, and also easier for it to grow and expand that code over time, right? To build new services, to introduce new capabilities in the future.
Very cool. Now, Richard, I know you had a big part in this. How can modularization be leveraged by builders and developers in the Hedera ecosystem?
I think one of the biggest ways, there's a variety of different ways in which this will impact people. So one way is just the ability to contribute to the underlying consensus node software. I know historically, not all the code was open. It was all open source several years ago. But there's a large code base. It's very difficult to get involved with. With modularity, it makes it a lot easier for people to find a particular service that they're interested in contributing to. For example, if you wanted to make some enhancements to the consensus service, it's a lot easier to actually participate and contribute code. There are other indirect ways in which this is going to benefit people. So one of the things that we were able to do by reorganizing the way that the code was set up was to be able to create new, I'd say maybe a type of node that you can use. For example, we could now more easily create a node that runs in synchronous mode, which would be really good for your testing. So when you're running all of your tests, you don't have to have sleeps and everything all over the place. You can actually just stand up a node and execute it. And that node could also use vastly fewer resources than a full node would use, because we can get rid of a lot of the overhead that's necessary for a normal node in a network, but isn't necessary for testing. So I think there are a lot of different ways that this could end up impacting builders, both directly and indirectly, in terms of contributing or having more interesting local nodes, if you will, that they can use for doing their testing with.
So, and similar question, but for the users, of course, this is going to have an impact on how developers do things. But what about the users out there? Are they going to be able to see any differences as far as the products that are brought to market?
So it opens up the door for contributors, developers who are contributing to the code base to more easily develop services, new capabilities, HIP contributions, and all of that, the implementation of those HIPs. I would say that the actual change, the implementation that went out in release 49 is hopefully going to be invisible to most developers. There might be some minor differences in the sense or in the timing where some errors happen, but all of that has been tested and communicated ahead of time so that builders in the ecosystem minimize the impact of those changes in their applications.
All right, fair enough. So, Richard, one more for you. What do you think the long-term impacts of this upgrade are going to be on the Hedera network?
Long-term, it's going to lead to better, more stable node software, a greater velocity in which features can be developed and delivered, and opportunity for us to have a much stronger collaborative development experience where it's not just all Swirls Labs, but we can really grow that community of contributions and get a lot of people involved in building the software.
All right, makes perfect sense. Well, guys, you keep executing on that roadmap, the newly, freshly updated roadmap that we have, and you guys are always welcome back.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brendan.
And with that, let's get into some network analysis. Over the past week, we've averaged about 1,700 transactions per second, though at the time of recording, we're up towards 2,000 transactions per second, which has allowed us to process over 1 billion transactions over the past 7 days. We've also had a max TPS of about 7,700. Last week, we mentioned that the time of consensus finality had jumped to over 4 seconds, but this week, there has been a drastic move in the other direction to about 3.1 seconds. We also managed to create over 30,000 accounts just in the past week. Looking at our fungible tokens, Wrapped HBAR took the top spot, followed by Dovu and Karate. Then the native token of SaucerSwap Sauce is up next, followed by the native USDC, the meme coin Zero, and Energy Trade token. The top 10 is rounded out by Jam, Bridged USDC, and Real, which I'm not really that familiar with. Moving down to our NFTs, the 2024 Road Code Access card reclaimed the top spot, followed by SaucerSwap's Liquidity Provider token and Kabila's Early Access INO card. The Slime World NFT is up next, followed by Bank Social's Secura NFT. Next up, we have Koala Club, a couple PixFi Founders tokens, the Hedera and ETH versions, the Times WTF, and H-Suite's LP token. And now let's take a quick look at DeFi. The total value locked in the Hedera DeFi ecosystem is at $73 million. $68 million of that is on SaucerSwap, $3 million on HSuite, and $1.8 million is on HelaSwap. Looking at the crypto and HBAR markets, Bitcoin is down 1.6% on the day and 4% on the week, to the lower end of the range it's been in for the past few months, and currently it's sitting at about $61,000. HBAR is pretty flat on the day and the week to 7.9 cents, and has been in a short-term trading range between 7.4 and 8.1 cents. So those are the levels I'll be watching. One good piece of alt news that came out this week is it looks likely that Solana could get an ETF. This would solidify most Layer 1 network cryptocurrencies as non-securities, and it would only be a matter of time before HBAR would be included in a US ETF. So hopefully next week we're going to get Zep back. We're also going to get Carlos. He's the CEO of YSET and CLSQ, to give us an update on their transactional Internet of Things, also their collaboration with Saudi Arabia. Of course, we're going to get Rob back for Shark Bites, so continue to drop your questions down there in the comments. If you have any questions on the Hedera ecosystem or the HBAR economy, I'm also going to try to do a space with CoinGecko, and they are doing some incentive programs with Hedera, some education things with Hedera, so we want to catch up on that as well. That's pretty much all we have. We'll see you next week.